Okay, so few couple of practical matters before the seminar starts. Firstly, of course, welcome to you all on my behalf. But most of the audience is now in YouTube stream today, and for that reason we have to talk to the microphone all the time so that they can hear our voices. And we are using the Menti wall for the questions and comments today. And Menti works fine with a cell phone, so just go with your cell phone browser to the address www.menti.com and enter the code 3492426. I'll try to remember to show this slide every once in a while so that people in the YouTube stream can also log into the Menti. But the code also is in the YouTube description as well as the program of this seminar. And here is also the program. And one thing, you who are present in this room, we don't circulate the microphone here due to this corona situation. So if you have any questions between the presentations, just ask the questions, but I hope that the presenter who will answer to the question, or Titta, will say the question again to the microphone so that the YouTube stream audience will also hear the question. But that was these two practical matters that I was planning to tell you. And then I ask Anne Pihlanto to come to open the seminar.
Well, welcome to this seminar about this, how these novel protein sources can increase our sustainability and also the health properties. So this is part of this Strategic Research Council program, and we have started already at 2015. So we have now a lot of results that you will hear later. But our aim was at the beginning when we applied this project was that our protein self-sufficiency will be increased by 2030. I think that we promised about 60% or 70% that our protein sufficiency will be. And at the same time that the Finns will be healthier and our protein system is diversified. We have new food and feed products that are healthy both for humans and for animals, and also that there are a lot of new business and expert opportunities at the same time. So this is what kind of project this is. So we have a lot of research has been done at the primary production. So how the new plants can be produced, and what kind of possibilities there is in Finland to produce these kind of raw materials in the fields. And also, yes, that has been the main aim there. And then how these new or underutilized raw materials can be used, what kind of quality there is, and how they can be produced to food products. And also, we will hear today the health part about how the changing of your diet affects on your health, intervention studies, and also how consumers see the changes in the products in coming years, and what kind of they have seen already the changes in the products. And then we have also a lot of studies going on in this environmental part about how these new products, what kind of environmental impact they have, and also how the Central Finland sees the changes in in the what kind of product they will produce. So this will increase our self-sufficiency and also the increase the environmental and social economic aspects. So, as I told, this has been started already at 2015, and we will have still some months next year. And this has been done together with University of Turku, which was at the beginning of the project. They make these scenarios how we will get our vision, and then in the health part and University of Jyväskylä, they have done these social economic aspects, and Makery has participated by the consumers part, and TNO from the Netherlands, they have mainly studied the allergenicity effect of the new raw materials. And then Norwegian University of Life Science, they have been participating in the in vitro digestibility of these new raw materials. So I hope you will all have very good seminar here to see the most new results from our project. So I think that was it Titta who will then continue, but welcome on my behalf to this seminar.
Okay, so too many people running around here now. So the next speaker will be Anne-Maria Pajari from Helsinki University, and she will tell more details about this intervention study, more results, and so further notice, please. Anne-Maria, please come.
So good afternoon on my behalf. I really feel privileged to have been part of this very big consortium and research project, and I can hardly believe it's nearly 6 years we started. It has gone so fast. So my part has been to carry out a clinical intervention study on the effects on replacing animal protein in our diet with plant protein sources. And over these years, we've gathered quite a lot of results, and the main results I'm now going to show you today. So first, about the clinical intervention. Some of you might heard this before, but be patient, I'll go it through anyway. So we enrolled adults, healthy adults, with working age, so people around age 20 to 69 years old, quite a large scale. And we allocated them to 3 different groups, and we aimed to have around 50 persons per group. And I think we nearly achieved that aim. It appeared that females were more interested about the subject, so most of the volunteers are females, 79%, males 21%. They were also perhaps a little bit more further educated than Finns on average. The BMI range was quite large, between 17 to 38. But all these volunteers were really dedicated to our intervention, and we had 146 persons starting the intervention, and of those 136 went through completely the whole intervention, and this was 3 months intervention. So it's, I think, a huge achievement that so many people our volunteers stick to the diets we introduced to them and went through the whole intervention. And I am really, really grateful to every one of them, and just say it now that if I can't remember it at the end of the presentation. So these 3 groups were allocated to 3 different diets, differing in their protein composition. Diet 1 represented the current Finnish diet, where protein, the amount of protein is 17 energy percent of the energy, and of proteins, 70% comes from animal protein sources and 30% from plant-based sources. And this 30% mainly represents grain products, so cereals, rye, oat, wheat, and that sort of stuff. And we took this as our basis where we started to modulate the protein content. So we took all the animal protein sources and started to replace them with plant-based sources. And we had, in terms of concentration, we have 50% at 50% group, and then 30% animal protein and 70% plant-based protein. And we used quite a lot of beans to replace animal proteins. So we added, for example, faba beans, peas, also some more grains, particularly oat, soy products. We had also quinoa a little bit in some products, and also nuts and seeds were actually introduced quite a lot to the diet. So we had these 2 diets where the amount of plant proteins were increased compared to the average Finnish diet. We kept the number of fish meals constant because we thought sort of it was quite a we have this recommendation to use 2 meals per week fish products, and we kept that throughout all the diets. So basically, the whole diet approach is so that it was we were thinking that we'll control the proteins, but actually many foods are a source of protein, and therefore it seems to us that we are actually meddling with the whole diet. And so we ended up having like a whole diet approach where we controlled around 80% of the foods the volunteers ate. So on plates, these diets didn't look that much different. So this is sort of like a representation what it meant on a volunteer's plate. So you can see, I'm not sure if you can see the pointer or not, but on your left-hand side, there is animal protein-based diet where there are classical Finnish or Swedish meatballs, if you like, and then there's milk and meat in between the bread. And here we have like the 50-50 thing where some of the meat, minced meat, has been replaced with beetroot in this case, and then there are a little bit more, there's lentils or legumes there, and here the more plant protein based option is with legume meatballs sort of. So no meat here, and water and no meat between the bread. So this is just to demonstrate to you that the diets actually didn't differ so much in appearance. So you can do like your conventional diet, but just change part of the raw materials. So as I told you, this was 80% controlled, so we distributed quite a lot of the protein sources to the volunteers who visited our research center once a week, and they were weighed, and we asked how have you been doing and how is it, and have you managed to follow the diet, and also they were given quite a lot of food, so all sorts of meat foods or meat substitutes, also cereals, peas, lentils, beans given as raw material which they could use to prepare their foods. So it was quite hard work for the volunteers, because I mean, just think about yourself eating 3 months what you are told to eat. It's actually quite demanding just to follow the orders, and that's why I was when we started this intervention, I was thinking that whether they might stop after 2 months and then everything is spoiled and so on. But I was so happy with the volunteers. They were really committed and actually went through the whole 3 months period. And so how did we succeed? So we. One way to look at this is to look at what were the actual dietary intakes. So we collected, we used 4 days food records at the before starting the intervention and at the end of the intervention, and the volunteers wrote down everything they ate during those 4 days, and we've used those to calculate nutrient intakes and so forth. So if we look at the protein intake that really happened, we can see that so there is this animal 50-50 and plant-based diets, that we actually achieved this 70 energy% aim both in animal and 50-50 groups, but the most plant-based group didn't quite achieve it on average. I think this is quite a good result as such, and actually quite expected. But still, we've been thinking the reasons why we didn't quite reach the protein protein intake in the most plant-based group. And one reason might be that it was that they perhaps they weren't able to consume all the legumes we gave them, and there's 2 reasons for that. Some of them suffered some intestinal symptoms, gut symptoms of that quite a big amount of legumes consumed daily, and the other reason is that they needed to prepare some. So we gave, let's say, peas or beans as such, and we gave them recipes to how to make the foods, but perhaps not all had the time to really prepare the food for themselves. We actually distributed quite a lot of ready-made meals as well. So, but part of the diet was all the foods or protein sources were given as raw materials. Anyway, I'm quite happy with this result. So what happened? Interesting question. What happened to other dietary intakes when we changed the protein sources, but many plant-based protein sources not only contain protein, but they have, of course, the carbohydrate part, and they also the fat part. So they are not like a pure protein sources. So changing the protein sources changes other things in the diet as well. And one of the changes we saw was that fat quantity didn't change. So fat intake remained the same among all the dietary groups, but fat quality changed. And this is actually quite expected. So intake of saturated fat decreased or was lowest in the most plant-based plant protein group, and that's sort of like quite nicely goes down. Also, intake of cholesterol decreases in the same way as that is quite expected, as cholesterol comes mainly from animal sources. And then, on the other hand, the intake of unsaturated fatty acids increased or was higher in the 50-50 and in the most plant protein based diet. So and you can see that's all the changes are quite highly statistically significant. And also, if we look at the polyunsaturated N-5 fatty acid intakes, so that goes up as well. So all that is quite in favor of promoting healthy changes in an individual. And also, what is, I think, quite remarkable actually is that there was an increase in dietary fiber intake with the replacement of protein sources. And it's interesting that even in that animal protein group, the average intake was actually according the dietary recommendation, it was around 25 grams per day. And that just showing that our volunteers were more health conscious than Finns on average. And even in those individuals, changing the protein source increases fiber intake. That's quite I think, like a good achievement. You might look at the very huge variation. There was one person in this most animal-based group who got 80 grams fiber per day. Just think about it. He was a young man doing a lot of exercise and eating quite a lot of food. So there's nothing uncommon in the foods he ate, just that he ate quite a lot, and one can achieve 80 grams per day of fiber, which is, I think it's really huge amount of fiber, but good for him. Anyway, we still, apart from him, we still can see like a statistically significant difference between the dietary groups. So, and it's no wonder that, so we collected blood samples before the intervention and during the intervention and measured blood lipids, for example. And so it's no wonder that we can see like a compared to the baseline, we can see a difference in total cholesterol concentrations in the blood between the dietary groups. So this is the animal protein group, 50-50, and plant protein group. And as you can see, there's also quite like a stepwise drop between the groups. And the difference is actually from 5.4 to 5.0, which is, I think this is quite a big drop in the cholesterol levels. And particularly if we look at the LDL cholesterol, which is like the most important risk factor for cardiovascular or coronary heart disease. So there you can see a drop from 3.0, a difference from 3.2 to 2.9. And perhaps some of you remember that the recommendation for LDL is that it is good to be under 3. So we could, with this change, actually we could get that 3 with the change seen in the 50-50 group, but of course it's even more pronounced with the plant protein-based group. But I think this quite clearly demonstrates that this change is probably not due to the protein content as such, or the different protein source, but this reflects the change in fat quality in the diet, and also the dietary fiber may have a role here as well. So other things than protein is perhaps underlying this effect. So then I'll go to other things. So I'll go to micronutrients, and let's start with iron intake. And I'm sorry I didn't have time to make these very colorful, so you've got the colorful frames, but because we've prepared these images for publication, and it needs to be in black and white, and unfortunately I didn't have time to redo these in colors, so try to hang on what I'll say. Let's start with iron intake, and there's been a lot of speculation. What happens to iron intake if we change from animal proteins from animal proteins to more plant-based proteins? And I think this was sort of a surprise to us. We've looked at this in many ways. So when we calculate the intake of total iron, so there is actually a slight increase in the iron intake when we move from animal to 50-50 to our plant-based group, and that's statistically significant. So this is the box plot. This is a median value, and this is the 70. Here is 75% of observations. Here is 25, and that's like the viscous variation up and down. And these are actually the individuals, how they are situated in the group. So there's an increase. There is, of course, like a very sharp decrease in animal-derived iron because meat intake was limited. So it goes down quite sharply with the replacement. But on the other hand, plant-derived iron, the intake of plant-derived iron is increasing, or is higher in the 50-50 and plant protein, most plant protein derived group. So there's of course a difference in bioavailability of animal versus plant-derived iron, and it's a well-known fact that meat or heme iron is around 5 times more efficiently absorbed in the in the small intestine. So it's much more bioavailable than plant-derived iron. But nevertheless, here it seems that the total amount of iron is important, because we actually couldn't see no whatsoever effect on iron status measured from blood in 3 different ways. So blood hemoglobin, plasma ferritin, and plasma transferrin receptor. And so let me just explain how to interpret these figures. So here is hemoglobin before the intervention, and here is hemoglobin at the end of intervention. And these dots here are the volunteers or their values. And so let's take that dot. It means that he or she started with the value 120 and ended up with a value of 115 perhaps. So in her, probably her, the concentration was smaller at the end of the study, but nevertheless, when we take all the observations and draw these lines showing what happens on average in the group, so all the lines for every and each of the dietary groups are sort of on top of each other, saying that there's absolutely no difference between the diets on hemoglobin, and also which you can see quite easily because they are on top of each other. And this is also the angle is around 45 degrees, so meaning no change. Then plasma ferritin showing or representing the iron stores. There's a little bit more going on, but nothing statistically significant. And here also the lines are quite close to each other, quite on top of each other. And this one, which goes sort of lower, is the 50-50 group. So no trend when we think about the dietary setting. And plasma transferrin receptor, there's a larger variation there, but it's still not statistically significant. And when we put all these together, or a statistician who consulted us, put all these together and look at all these three in a multifactorial or whatsoever model, I'm not able to carry out by myself. So there wasn't any statistically significant difference among the dietary groups. So we need to think that there wasn't no major effect on iron status. And I think this is sort of a news because every single one has been, or nearly, I've had it many times asked that whether something happened to iron status. So, but then we'll move on to, so that was a good news, of course. Then we'll move to vitamin B12 intake and status. So intake is what comes from diet, and status is when the concentration or biomarker of that particular nutrient is measured in a blood or in urine. So this is from blood. This is calculated from the 4-day food records. And so you can see that, of course, the intake is highest in the animal protein group, is lower in 55th, and even lower in the plant protein group. And that's also like a stepwise drop. And when we look at the active vitamin B12 concentration in the blood, there's baseline, and compared to the baseline, the dietary group, so this is sort of a forced baseline. Every dietary group has been forced into the same spot. There is quite clear difference between, so the most plant-based protein group differs highly significantly significantly from both the animal and 50-50 groups. So there's quite a sharp drop. And actually, when we look at the intake, it's quite surprising that, so the intake goes down even with 50-50 group, but in the status, there's no difference between the animal and 50-50 groups. There's only like the drop in the plant protein group. So this is something we need to think about. The drop, I must say that the values were in line with the recommended intake, so nothing awfully worrying there. There were some persons who dropped below the recommended intakes and or reference values in the blood. And we've interpreted this so that as such, in this 3 months time and with healthy adults, there's nothing to worry about. But of course, if we think that this sort of a diet is followed year after year, and if there are more sensitive groups, for example, elderly people, so of course we need to think about vitamin B intake, vitamin B12 intake, whether that is like at the appropriate level. Then folate intake. Folate is, why we look at this is that Finns on average don't get quite enough folate. And that's the only vitamin actually which we can see in Finn diet report where we actually need to be a little bit conscious so that we should pay attention to folate intake. And folate, perhaps if you don't remember, it comes from plants and vegetables, so particularly intensely green vegetables like broccoli and spinach and that sort of stuff are good sources of folate. And of course, legumes are a good source of folate, and we were sort of thinking that perhaps we'll see here something. And actually, when we look at the intakes, there is an increasing trend in the intake compared animal and 50-50 to plant protein groups. So that is as we expected, but we couldn't see any difference in the status markers measured in the blood. So, would say it's a good thing that there was increase in folate. We couldn't see that it made any difference to the blood values, but so would say like a mild effect there. Then an interesting micronutrient, iodine. And this, I must say, this result was a surprise to us. First of all, there was, when we look at the intakes, so there is a very clear decrease in iodine intake from animal to 50-50 to plant group, and they are highly significant drops. And then when we measured iodine in the urine at the end of the intervention, it's a mass spec-based method, so it's awfully expensive, and we only had money to measure it at the end of the intervention. But I think it's like a fair measure to relate the intakes with the status markers. So the same thing happens there, and we can see quite clear decrease or quite clear lower concentrations of iodine in both in 50-50 and plant-based groups when compared to the animal protein group. And I think this is something we need to pay attention to because so actually milk products are the most in this milk products are a very important source of iodine in a Finnish diet. And now I need to tell you that when we reduced milk products in the plant-based diet, so we gave sort of like replacing the milk in their everyday life, we gave them these plant-based milks, but they were not supplemented. So this result reflects the situation that there's no supplementation and in that time, actually, most of the plant, so-called plant milks were not supplemented. Nowadays, so this was carried out in 2017, and after 3 years, we have quite a different situation at the moment. But it was also our intention that we wanted to see. The volunteers were told not to use any dietary supplements. Just that we could see that what happens to nutrient intakes and status. And so, of course, I think quite a clear indication here is that it's very good to supplement our plant milks with iodine and with vitamin B12 as well, I think. But yeah, we can have a discussion about that later on. Okay, then I have a postdoctoral researcher in my group who is interested in bone health, and she actually has already published this, she looked at the indicators of bone health. And here, if we look at the first intakes of vitamin D and calcium, which are important for bone health, we can see that there is a slight decrease in vitamin D intakes. It's actually statistically significant when compared to, so in these two groups compared to animal protein group. There is in absolute values there's a bigger decrease in calcium intake. And that's actually quite understandable. If we limit the intake of milk products, it's like the consequence is that we'll get less calcium. But what happens, coming back to the, how big the drop, we still have it, I think here the median value is something like 800 milligrams. So it's not that low intake even in the most plant-based group. So if, I'm just checking where I am. So if we look at the markers of calcium metabolism, we have here the concentrations of parathyroid hormone, and it shows that it's at the end of the intervention, the concentration is highest in the most plant protein-based group, which differs from the two other groups, and it indicates. So parathyroid hormone is a hormone that affects the bone and releases calcium from the bone to blood circulation. So it regulates blood calcium concentrations. Though there was no difference between dietary groups in blood calcium concentration, which is quite understandable because it's really tightly regulated, but there was a difference in calcium excreted to urine, which was less in plant 50-50 and most plant protein groups compared to the animal protein groups, giving an indication that the body is trying to reserve its calcium stores and not giving it out. So this is sort of like extra calcium goes to the urine, and there's no extra calcium to consume here, so it's kept in the body. That's just for you to perhaps to interpret these next results, which is these are markers for bone turnover. So there's a molecule called PINP and CTX, and this is telling us something about bone formation. This is telling something about bone reception, and then we can look at them both together. And here you'll see that both PINP and CTX concentrations are the highest, or are higher than particularly in the animal protein group. And here, when we take their relation, it drops compared to the other two groups. So just shortly, the interpretation here is that both bone formation and resorption are increased. So in the most plant protein-based group, so new bone is formed and old bone is degraded, and it's a little bit hard to say what it means, but it might make bones more prone to fractures and so on. So it's perhaps not so good thing when we think about bone health. And then last, I'm not sure if I've consumed all my time, but I hope I'll have time to show you the indicators of gut health results. So here I have a background in studying gut health since I started with my PhD thesis a long time ago. And One idea, so as like a basis for this gut health bit, it's well-known fact from population studies that high consumption of red and processed meat is a risk factor for colorectal cancer. So it increases the risk of colorectal cancer. And one of the ideas or the ideas of the underlying mechanisms is that red meat leads to higher formation of so-called N-nitroso compounds in the colon, so in the large intestine. So because part of the protein and heme iron escapes the digestion in the small intestine and they end up into the colon where gut microbiota is producing these N-nitroso compounds. And N-nitroso compounds, on the other hand, may cause DNA damage. And that might be like the reason cancer risk is increased with high red meat consumption. So we measured the concentration of N-nitroso compounds in the stool of the volunteers. We could see lower production of NOx in 50-50 and in the plant protein-based group. And when we can make a distinction between heme-derived NOx, and particularly there you can see that the production or the concentration in the stool is much lower in 50-50 and in the plant-based protein group. So this is quite a nice result when we think about the replacement and clearly is in line with the population studies show and could explain why high consumption of red meat is not good for the risk of colorectal cancer. So this was sort of an expected result, but I'm surprised that the effect was so big. I think that's a quite significant drop in these NOx. Then, because we had healthy volunteers, we just can't have like a tissue sample taken from them during the intervention. I would love to have gut wall tissue, but we can't do it for ethical reasons. So we've used human colorectal cancer cell lines to sort of a surrogate representatives of the gut wall cells. And so we had the stool samples from the volunteers. We've extracted so-called fecal water from those stool samples, and then we've taken every single one of the stool so-called fecal water samples and exposed human colorectal cancer cells to the fecal water and measured whether those cells stay alive or not, whether they die away or not. And this is sort of like a quite rough method to look at the susceptibility of cancer, but it's actually used quite a lot in pharmacy, so or in the business of trying to figure out new drugs against cancer, for example. So we just took it in a different way and exposed the cancer cells to fecal water. So the cells were exposed 24 hours, and then we measured how viable the cells were, so whether they were alive or not, and compared that to like a basic cell culture media. And so the results are as percentages of the viability of control cells grown in standard cell culture media. And we used 3 different concentrations of fecal water, 10, 20, and 30%, and here are the dietary groups. Even in the most less concentrated way, there was difference between the dietary groups, and the more we had like the fecal water, the sharper the effect. And when you looked at this 30% exposure, you'll see that I would sort of sum up this, that the cancer cells exposed to fecal water coming from the plant-based group were killed quite quite much more efficiently than those coming from the animal protein group. And I think this is, so I think the trend is the same, whatever concentration we used. And it tells that there is something, perhaps some bioactive compounds in the fecal water coming from the most plant protein-based group that are able to kill the cancer cells. So I interpret this as like in favor of the plant protein group. So it's good that these cancer cells are killed. So, and we are looking at what are like the compounds in the fecal water that may kill cancer cells. And then last but not least, the gut microbiota composition, which was measured from the samples, stool samples of the volunteers. And this, so gut microbiota is of course, it's quite trendy and for a reason at the moment in health research. But it's also a very complex thing. And I'm only showing you like 5% of the results here, but this is like the major thing. So first of all, if we look at the whole composition of the gut microbiota was measured based on the DNA or the bacteria DNA extracted from the stool samples. And so these results here are like the overview of the composition. And so before we started the intervention, we thought that there must be like a huge impact of changing the protein source. So that might have a huge impact on gut microbiota composition. But I'm afraid it wasn't so. So first of all, here these plots represent each group at the beginning and at the end, and just to show you like the time-wise change. So I think yes. So the black is the bacteria composition at the beginning, and the red one is at the end of the intervention. And this is the animal protein group, and you'll see the circles here. They sort of represent the composition. And these circles are actually on top of each other in the animal protein-based group, showing absolutely no difference in the gut microbiota profile, which is actually quite expected. Here is a 50-50 group, and here the circles sort of stretch a little bit down, but still mostly they are like covering the same area. And then the plant protein-based group, there was of course like a biggest change, and there something happened there. But this is, I've been told that this is not like a huge impact anyway. So it shifts a little bit. So there's black and there's the red. And here's like a comparison of the effects. You could, so we put all the data together and didn't care about the dietary group, only divided the volunteers based on their BMI status under 25 and over 25. So I think, I'm not quite sure which way it is, but let's say that the black is under 25 and red is over. It might be other way around, but there's actually quite significant difference in the profiles based on BMI, and that's actually bigger than either of these diets had. So I think our like the method works, but it's just like the thing was that there wasn't that big effect on the overall composition of gut microbiota. There are many changes in single bacteria strains, but I'm not going to show. I would need like an hour or so to introduce you those. But anyway, here are all the three groups represented in one figure. And yes, the circles are a little bit different types, but basically they cover the same area. So not a big difference. And the biggest difference or effect was in the most plant protein-based group. And there's actually a slight decrease in richness, but an increase in diversity, which is, it's like a borderline statistical significance, but would say that is a favorable change. So in summary, replacing animal proteins with plant protein sources in an average Finnish or Nordic diet leads to more favorable dietary fat composition, higher intake of dietary fiber, more favorable blood lipid profile, lower intake of animal-derived iron and higher intake of plant-derived iron, but no major effect on iron status, lower intakes of vitamin D and calcium, which is associated with markers of higher bone turnover rate, which is perhaps not that favorable for the bone, lower intake and status for vitamin B12 and iodine, and very favorable changes in indicators of gut health. So thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.
There is one question received via Mentimeter. Were the diets planned or just was material provided in this study?
Oh, the diets were very carefully designed and planned. So we did, on my postdoc essay, Päivärinta did a huge amount of work to calculate the diets, or diet composition.
Okay, another one. Thank you for an excellent presentation and very interesting results, Anne-Maria. Related to gut well-being, did you collect information on the gut symptoms experienced by the subjects during the intervention?
Oh, that's a very good question. The volunteers filled in so-called experience diaries where they could tell their gut symptoms as well, but we didn't name it as symptoms because we were thinking that then they are only concentrating on the bad things. So they were allowed to write all sorts of experiences they had during the intervention. And yes, many of them had gut symptoms as well.
Any other questions from the audience? You can.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's a bit of a follow-up, I think. Did you have any chances to follow up to see how many of your subjects actually now later have kept up the changes in the diet, or have they reverted? Do you have any information on that?
So the question is whether we have any information how many of the volunteers sort of changed their dietary habits for good or for a longer
Permanent
time.
change. Yeah.
For more permanent way. Actually, we have done that, and actually Antti could comment on that, I guess. Or do you want me to? I think there were quite a number. Quite many of them did change their habits, but I haven't got the exact figures. If Antti, you have. Okay, Antti Isokangas will show you that bit later in his presentation.
One more question. Do you think the 3 months period is sufficient time to see changes in gut microbiota?
Yeah, definitely it is. Actually, our gut microbiota specialist Anne Salonen says that even much shorter periods of time are quite enough to show a change. Even a week might be enough to achieve some changes in the gut microbiota composition.
The next one. Checking impacts in the hemoglobin, wouldn't it require more long-term diet shifts and testing than just few months. Anemia in vegetarians is more common than people that eat meat.
Yes, certainly. That's true, but in a way, we were interested to see whether the diets or the change or replacement would affect. Actually, the time for red blood cells to renew is 3 months. So if there would be like a drastic changes, we should have been able to see them. But of course, mild anemia needs longer time to develop, and we can't say that iron status, let's say in a year or two perspective, wouldn't have changed. It's just that this 3 months wasn't enough to see changes, and we were expecting to see changes, and we need to say that we couldn't see. We tried to dig it out, but it wasn't there.
Yes. More like a comment. Also, it would be great in the figures to have a line for the daily recommended intake of the micronutrients, as this way it is hard to tell which diet is best for which nutrients.
Yes, true. I'll take the advice for my next presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I think that was all for the questions. Any from the audience now? More? Okay, if no,
Okay.
we thank you, Anne-Maria, for a very interesting presentation. And then we have Mark Smith coming from all the way from Netherlands via internet connection, hopefully working. So Mark is a PhD student at the University of Utrecht in Netherlands. And everything is working great. Welcome, Mark, online.
Hello.
Ethnicity and safety of novel food proteins. So, floor is yours, Mark.
Thank you. I'm going to hope that I can share the presentation. I'm going to take out my earpods because I hear myself. So let's share. So you can see everything? Okay, then I'll go. Okay, so thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Mikael Hildén, and I'm going to talk about the question if we can predict the allergenicity and safety of novel food protein. So, does this work? Wait a second. Yes, it works. Okay, so my project is part also of the ScenoProt consortium. And in this project, we're going to see if we can find protein sources for Finland. And we have found that the legume food group contains several candidates that meet the requirements as a novel food. And these are, for example, fava bean, soybean, and lupin. However, these are legumes, and we also know that legumes can elicit allergic reactions. And for example, peanut and soybean are part of the legume group and are well known for these severe food allergic reactions. We also want to investigate then the safety profile of these future candidates, and we need to ask ourselves if all these legumes can be safely eaten with respect to food allergy. And therefore, we investigated the prevalence of sensitization and cross-reactivity of these legumes. So today I'm going to talk about the sensitization and allergy in general, and I'm going to present the results of the prevalence of sensitization of these legumes. I'm also going to talk about the cross-reactivity between these legumes, And thirdly, I want to introduce a project we have started this summer, which investigates the effect of fermentation and digestion on the allergenicity of faba bean and lupin. And I want to end with some take-home messages. But first, I want to talk about the prevalence of sensitization and how sensitization occurs. So food sensitization occurs by processing and capture of an antigen by the body. And during the first exposure, the body produces IgE, which is known as food sensitization. However, there are no clinical complaints for the patient at this stage. So then, when the food is eaten for a secondary exposure, you see that the IgE has attached to effector cells such as mast cells and basophils, and this results in cross-linking of the IgE receptor, and this results in degranulation of these cells. And then you see this, the much-known clinical complaints in food allergies, such as swelling or even anaphylaxis. So in the allergenicity risk assessment, we want to answer a few questions regarding the novel foods. So the first question we want to answer is if the novel protein is able to elicit an allergic reaction in a food allergic population. So this is either by cross-reactivity and IgE binding. And what happens is the following in cross-reactive reactions in food allergy. You have IgE that is produced against a certain product, for example, peanut in this case. And when you eat, for example, soybean, the IgE that is produced against peanut also binds to the soybean proteins. And this results then in degranulation of the mast cell and cross-reactive clinical complaints. A secondary question we want to answer is if the novel protein is able to induce a new allergy. So, for example, you start eating lupin. Do these antibodies then get produced, bind to the lupin proteins, and also result in degranulation of effector cells? And this is then known as a novel allergy. So the first part of my research is going to investigate if faba bean and lupin and soybean are as allergenic as, for example, peanut. So we want to know what the prevalence of sensitization of different legumes is. And we also want to know how the prevalence of sensitization for faba bean, lupin, and soybean relates to other legumes. So we want to study this in a randomly selected population. And therefore we selected 106 patients who visited the allergology department in January and December 2018. And these patients were selected when they had a suspected food allergy combined with a positive diagnostic test. So these diagnostic tests are either a skin prick test or an IgE blood test. And to answer the question about the prevalence of sensitization, we created total extracts, fractions, and also individual proteins from 10 different legumes. And the protein fractions are important because they contain important allergens. So that's why we made this, because we can investigate it then. What we did was made extracts and fractions from the following 10 legumes. So we made extracts from peanut, green lentil, chickpea, also green pea and black lentil, faba bean, white bean, two kinds of lupins, so blue and white lupin, and also soybean. And as I mentioned earlier, the blue lupins, the blue and white lupins, the soybean, and also the faba bean are interesting novel foods for Finland. So how did we make these extracts? We used the legume seeds and we defatted them and created a flour. And then we used a 6 molar urea buffer to create total extracts of the legumes that I've just mentioned. And we also isolated individual components. So these are known allergens or possible allergens from these 10 legumes. This was successful for 5 of them. We also created the fractions that I have mentioned. So we first created a fraction which contained the soluble protein fraction just by solubilizing the flour and adding and taking the supernatant after centrifugation. And then the insoluble proteins are left in the pellet, and then we used ultrafiltration and centrifugation to create a 2S albumin and a 7S and 11S globulin fraction. And we did this because the 2S albumin fraction contains important allergens, for example, of peanut that are RH1, RH2, and RH6. And the 7S and 11S globulin fraction also contains important allergens, and these are for peanut, for example, RH1 and RH3. So then we had our extracts, fractions, and our individual components that we want to test. And we detected the presence of IgE using a urine blot. And if you can see here, we have coated these strips with the extracts, fractions of individual components. Then we introduce the serum sample, and if it's positive for IgE antibodies, they can bind to the extracts. Then we reintroduce anti-human IgE antibodies that are labeled with alkaline phosphatase, and that they can be visualized after adding a substrate. So there's a color reaction when you are positive for this extract fraction or component from a legume, and this can then be quantified. So I come to my first results now. So we have found that there are differences in the prevalence of sensitization of the selected legumes. So now I'm going to show you extracts first. And you can appreciate when you see the results from the extracts that peanut had the highest prevalence of sensitization, and faba bean together with the green lentil has the lowest prevalence of sensitization. And what you can also see, what's really interesting, is that there is kind of a ranking for these legumes. So peanut is quite high, and then faba bean is quite low. And we also investigated this in the individual components. So there we see that ARAH 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7 are much more prevalent than the other individual components. So it's interesting to see that both for the total extracts as for the individual allergens, there's a kind of a ranking to be seen. And also, based on the research of legume sensitization in the clinic, we expected to see a high prevalence of sensitization for peanut and soybean, because these are also the allergies that we often see in the clinic. And allergic reactions to other legumes, such as beans, are very hardly reported. We don't see them a lot. So the clinical prevalence of allergic reactions was reflected in the ranking of the legumes that is seen here. So the variations in the prevalence of sensitization were found corresponding to the clinical prevalence, and a low prevalence for faba bean, blue lupin, and soybean sensitization has been seen, which also could indicate a low allergenicity. There's still one remark to be made: a low prevalence of sensitization does not exclude the risk for clinical reactions. So you can still have clinical reactions even when the prevalence of sensitization for a specific legume is low. And if you assume that the prevalence of sensitization could be a parameter for the allergenicity of a certain legume, you can make a kind of scaling, which I've displayed just below here. And you see then that faba bean and green lentil are weakly allergenic, and peanut is strongly allergenic based on the prevalence of sensitization. However, we also want to know if there is cross-reactivity between these 10 legumes that we have selected. Therefore, I'm going to part 2 of my presentation. So we know that, for example, peanut allergic consumers can react to other legumes due to cross-reactivity. And we know that the degree of cross-reactivity between legumes is currently unknown. So there have been studies, but they are mostly in small populations or with a low number of legumes. And now we have the chance to investigate that between 10 legumes, so that's really interesting. So therefore we investigated the cross-reactivity between the 10 legumes in a legume allergic population. And our study population was as follows. So you see in the small table below here that we have selected at least 29 patients per legume. And if this was not possible for lentil and bean allergies in our department, because we just didn't have enough allergies. So we took 16 and 8 allergic patients respectively. So this is the first result. We have displayed the results of all these patients in a heat map that can be seen here. So every row of the heat map is an individual patient, and every column contains a different legume. So what you can immediately appreciate is that, by the way, the dark colors are the positives and the whites are negative. But what you can immediately appreciate is that a lot of patients were sensitized to all the 10 tested legumes. So we found 37% or 34 of the 92 patients that were sensitized to all 10 legumes. So this is really a lot. And we also saw that sensitization for peanut again was high, followed by soybean. And this is also corresponding with the prevalence of allergic reactions that are seen in the clinic. And what we can also see again is that the beans are the lowest of the legumes that we have tested. But we also wanted to know if there's co-sensitization between these legumes. So therefore we made the following table that you can see here. So every row of this table is a different allergy. So we start with peanut, soybean, green pea and lupin allergy. And every column of the table is the sensitization prevalence that has been found for these legumes within the population of allergic patients. So what you can immediately see is that there is a lot of co-sensitization also displayed in this table, and it occurs frequently. What we also see as an example, for example, is that when you're allergic for peanut, it's not always likely that you're also sensitized to faba beans. In this case, or in our case, it was only 37.9%. But there are also more higher co-sensitizations to be seen. So for example, when you're allergic for lupin, you are most likely to be sensitized to, like all the other legumes, there's a prevalence of 65% for white bean, but most of them are around 80 or 90%. So the co-sensitization is really high between these legumes. So then we wanted to know, well, which fraction contains the allergens that are responsible for the co-sensitization that we have seen. So therefore we evaluated the prevalence of sensitization for different fractions that we have made. So first I'm going to show the 7S and 11S globulin fraction. And what you can appreciate here is that it is quite similar to what we have seen when we saw the large heat map a previous slide back. That there is a lot of co-sensitization, also 30.4% is sensitized to all 7S and 11S globulin fraction that have been made. We also see that when we compare the 2S albumin fraction to the 7S and 11S globulin fraction, that especially the peanut 2S albumin fraction is quite high, which also makes sense because this contains the important allergens of peanuts, so ARA-H2 and ARA-H6. But the co-sensitization between the other albumin fractions is quite low. So based on these results, we can conclude that the 7S and 11S globulin fraction harbors cross-reactive allergens. We also investigated the albumin fraction, if you might remember. This was the soluble fraction of the made out of the flour, but this only contained a lot of allergens for peanut and not for the other legumes. So then we have the 7S and 11S globulin fraction that might be responsible for the co-sensitization, but we're also interested, of course, in the cross-reactivity between legumes, and therefore I'm going to show the next table. So here you see the cross-reactivity table, just in the same style as we just discussed. And now we have introduced also the percentage when you're allergic. So when you're allergic and sensitized for a component, you get noted as a positive. And then you see that co-allergy still occurs frequently, but the percentages are quite a bit lower. For example, if you're allergic to peanut, it's not always likely that you would react to other legumes. For example, only 3.4% of patients were also allergic for lentil. However, when you're allergic to bean, you see that the percentages are much higher, higher than 50% actually, that you're also allergic to another legume. So a small remark has to be made, because these are patient-reported allergies, and not all patients consume or report their allergies to the doctor because they simply just don't consume the legume, or are so the information is not entirely complete, but it is reflective of our population. So then I want to continue with the third part of my presentation, in which I'm going to talk about the project that we have started this summer. So this is a collaboration between work groups 3 and 5, and we're going to investigate the allergenicity of faba bean and lupin. And what we're going to do is evaluate the effect of processing, so cooking and subsequent fermentation of the lupa bean and faba beans. And we also want to digest them and investigate the effect on allergenicity then. So therefore we know that processing influences protein allergenicity. So most foods are not eaten as a raw product, but they can be. But most are processed either by, for example, fermentation or heat. And this results in a change in functionality or nutritional value. And then you end up with a processed product for consumers. So for apple, is this, for example, applesauce or apple pie? You also can appreciate that the processing has influence on several parameters, such as physiological changes by solubility. Oh yeah? Can you hear me again? Oh, perfect. Okay. Okay, so we know that the processing has influence on physiological parameters and also biological parameters such as digestibility and uptake, and for example also immunological parameters as allergenicity. So therefore we want to do this research, and we have designed it as following. We start with the lupin and faba bean extracts seeds, and we are going to heat process them, and also we're going to ferment them, and then we're going to subject them to gastric and duodenal digestion. So these are performed by pepsin or pancreatic enzymes, and then we want to evaluate all these extracts in an allergenicity assessment, which will be done in the Netherlands. And therefore we take the RBL1H2 cell. This is a model for mast cell degranulation and has the human epsilon receptor on the cell surface. So therefore we coat these cells with the serum from lupin and faba bean allergic patients that can bind to these Fc receptors. And then we introduced the lupin and faba bean extracts that have been heat processed or fermented and also have been digested. And introduction of these extracts results in degranulation of these RBL1H2 cells, which can be measured by beta-hexaminidase activity. So that can be a measure for the reactivity of the extracts that have been introduced. And we are currently at the gastric and duodenal digestion stage. So the extracts have all been made. So there are a few take-home messages that I want to discuss. Regarding the title of my presentation, Can we predict the allergenicity and safety of novel food proteins? What we have seen is that faba bean is less allergenic compared to peanut based on the sensitization data. However, it's interesting to see when we look at the cross-reactivity and co-sensitization data that when you're sensitized to faba bean, it is also likely that you're allergic to other legumes. And this data all comes from in vitro studies. And that's a remark that I want to make, that this needs to be confirmed in a clinical study. So preferably you want to do food challenges, of course. And based on previous research that I presented last year, we know that when there are more consumers of faba bean, there also will be more sensitizations for faba bean. However, when people start eating larger amounts of faba bean, there will not be more sensitization. This research has been published, I think, last year. So I didn't do all this work by myself. I was under the guidance of Kitty and Twimi, and my promoters André Knulst and Geert Hoebe also helped. But I also want to mainly thank the ScenoProt consortium for allowing me to do this research. So that's my my presentation for today, and I want to thank you for listening. And I hope everybody heard everything.
Yes, thank you. There were applause for you.
Did you hear?
Oh, I did hear.
Oh, let's do it again.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you.
Okay, there was at least one question, wasn't there? Can frequent use of soybean/faba bean promote allergy if already peanut/lupin allergy?
Yeah, so these are the results I presented in the table. Maybe I can share again the table. Is that possible? Okay. Okay, so perfect. So if we go to this one. So I think the question was regarding the allergenicity. When you're soybean allergic, and then the faba bean, or what was the combination? The
Promote allergy if already peanut/lupin allergy.
Yeah, so you see that the percentages are for soybean and peanut allergic patients are quite high, and also in soy, and also for faba bean they are much lower. So the bean allergic reactions are not likely to occur.
Is there any other questions from? Yes, you can.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm a complete novice in this area, but one question I have is whether you can see also, are they always permanent allergies, or do you have any information on allergies that subsume, and would that differ between the different legumes?
Yes, the question is that are the allergies always permanent, or is there possibility to have allergies which are disappearing?
Yeah, so there is a lot of research going on with immunotherapy or B-cell reconfiguration to stop or to diminish the effects of an allergy. It is possible, but yeah, it's investigated at this moment.
Or I have acquaintances which have been allergic when they are children, but when they grow up, it disappears. And do you have any sort of knowledge about that? What is the reason behind there?
So the immune system is always maturing. So there is a possibility that just by maturing, the allergy can go away. It's entirely possible, yeah.
Any other questions? I don't think so. We have any questions more in Menti? No. And if no other questions, we have a coffee break. Half an hour. We go on at 3 o'clock. And for the audience here, please, the coffee will be served at the cafeteria, so a little bit further from the hallway. And unfortunately, you have to enjoy your coffee by yourself there on the online. But let's meet again at 3 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
You can come here, so Mark can
I'm
see.
at the moment working at
Hello.
At the moment working on a novel food. We just
Yes.
launched it this month basically, and it is canola protein though. It is this rapeseed protein, which is very novel, and of course we do have the label of people who are allergic to mustard might be allergic to this product as well. Have you encountered some work regarding that, or maybe in your team, within your team, about specifically rapeseed allergenicity?
Yeah, I'm very aware of the cross-reactivity with mustard. That's a known one. But we're not working with rapeseed, by the way. But what would be interesting is to see if there are different allergenic fractions to be found. Wait a second, I'm going to. So what you want to do is to create different protein fractions of the rapeseed, so you can investigate if there is reactivity. What you want to do is find people who are rapeseed or mustard allergic and see if they react on your rapeseed and also on the product. So they could react to the raw product. The processed product could be allergenic.
Is that, well, the assumption here, because like you are saying, the clinical trials are very expensive to do. And so since rapeseed is not eaten as such, the oil is consumed and that's not a problem. But this is such a novel product at the moment that no one is going to eat rapeseed. So the association was, well, very close to mustard, therefore it would be safe to label it. But I'm very, very keen to see if there is that type of, especially into this. Sorry, I'm very bad with name, but this cross allergenicity.
Yeah.
If there is indeed some pattern that tells us yes, because again, we might not find people allergic to rapeseed because it's not hasn't been in the market until now, basically.
Yeah, that's the big problem with the allergenicity assessment of novel foods. You're not going to find someone that's allergic to anything that's not consumed. So what you could do, you could look at homology between other products. So use UniProt or something like that to see which foods are also possible cross-reactive. You know, based on literature, that's If I assume you have a complete literature search, so you could use that to find maybe more candidates that could be cross-reactive. But if you have mustard allergic patients, then you can investigate if the IgE from these patients binds to the rapeseed product. So that's a possibility.
Yes, I think that would be a very, very nice way to go. But thank you very much. I'm not going to take more of your time. And
No problem.
maybe I could drop you an email if it's okay for
Yeah,
you.
that's
just
good.
Just to have your contact and maybe follow up if in the near future we come across that type of studies.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So can I send you my email or? Oh, perfect. That's good. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so welcome back. We continue here, and we have the next presentation given by Ari Paloviita from University of Jyväskylä, and he presents domains and scales of protein transition, insights from the food system of Central Finland. Welcome, Ari.
Thank you, Titta. Thank you, Titta, and good afternoon, everybody. So we are now moving to social science side of this protein issue, and my title is Domains and Scales of Protein Transition, Insights from the Food System of Central Finland. So my aim is to provide a broader framing to this protein issue and to provide a broader framework to capture the interconnections between protein-related issues. So in this presentation, I will present the framework first and then illustrate that framework with the case study of Central Finland. So first I define what is protein transition. So it can be defined as the changing composition of dietary protein intake to increase the sustainability of diets. And that is very much related to greater diversity of protein sources. And that's one of the key issues here in this ScenoProt project. So this diversity refers especially to increase of plant-based protein sources, but also other sources like small underutilized fish species like roach or herring, and other sources like mushrooms, insects, and lab-grown proteins. About this research, this is qualitative research. Our purpose was to investigate stakeholders' perceptions on protein transition. Stakeholders were mainly from Central Finland, so it was kind of a regional study. And our interview data, which was collected in 2018, involved 4 very different type of focus groups, including ScenoProt researchers, oil hemp actors, feed specialists, and adult students of sustainable gastronomy. We also had 4 politician interviews. They were members of the Finnish parliament, and we had 1 pair interview with project workers who were involved in a specific protein-related regional project. So our regional case study was focused on situation in Central Finland. And Central Finland is an interesting case because it is very much dominated by animal-based protein production and industry, which means dairy and meat. And if we think about protein transition in Central Finland, it can be defined as grassroots level initiatives in public food services, restaurants, small enterprises, and in some farms. And the transition is very much demand-driven, so that consumers are demanding more plant-based proteins, and also some restaurants and public food services. So first I present these domains of protein transition we have identified. So first we have a food quality domain, which includes issues such as taste and other quality criteria. Then we have environmental domain, including carbon footprint issues and other environmental impacts. Then there's a health domain, including, for example, nutritional issues. We have a socio-cultural domain, including different social values, food culture, ethics, and this kind of aspects. There's a socio-economic domain, including livelihoods, prices, food security issues, and so on. And then we have a sixth domain is the governance domain, including policies which are affecting protein system. And then moving to scales of protein transition, there are 6 scales identified. The first scale is ingredient level, which refers to whole foods or their transformations. Then there's a level of disease, which refers to consumers' repertoires of hot meals. Then there's a diet level, which has a strong link to sustainability and health issues. Then there's a regional level, which refers to ecological, economic, and cultural conditions in a certain region. Then there's a supply chain level, which is more a product-oriented perspective, referring to value chains of these new protein products. And finally, there's the largest, broadest level is food system level, including all the food system activities and their drivers and their outcomes in the society and the environment. So I now move to actual empirical findings from Central Finland, domain by domain. So first, in terms of quality domain, our respondents very much raised the issue of taste. Taste is important. Good taste is always important, and it has a direct implication to disease and diets. And also one aspect which was very much prioritized was locally produced food. So people in Central Finland tend to prefer short supply chains instead of global supply chains like soya chains. Then environmental domain, it was acknowledged that unbalanced diets and protein overconsumption, they have implications to global environmental problems, and especially greenhouse gas emissions of red meat-based diets were commonly acknowledged. Then in the health domain, one concern was health equity, referring to food prices of the new products and affordability of novel protein products, especially when we are talking about people with lower incomes. There was a concern that are all these products equally available. But in general, health and environmental benefits of plant-based diets were agreed and acknowledged. One point was raised that actually in the markets, the big multinational companies are very much marketing only a few plants, whereas there are actually many underutilized plants available, which even have a better nutritional content. But the markets are full of these rice and maize, wheat-based products. So that was one health-related issue also. This socio-cultural domain included many very interesting aspects. There are still, many people had experienced negative attitudes towards plant-based diets and plant-based disease, and even neophobia towards these new products. And some protein sources are also having relatively poor reputation. For example, hemp has a certain drug reputation. Then roach, which is an underutilized fish, is also a little bit undervalued. Then in general, if you think about food culture in Central Finland, dairy and meat, they have a very strong toehold within the regional food culture. And that has an implication to the disease and diets in that region. And when we go to ingredient level, it was also concerned that when we think about basic beans compared to different transformations such as pullet oats, so basic beans suffer dullness and lack of media sexiness without a selling story. So maybe that is one thing to introduce these very basic beans to people's diets and disease, and not only these ready-made products. That was one social aspect here. Socioeconomic domain was relatively important in our case study. First of all, there were doubts about suitability and profitability of plant protein production in Central Finland. And especially farmers raised concerns about the risks of plant protein production, because plant production is simply very much dependent on the weather and climate conditions. So they were perceived risky business in a sense. Also, farmers thought that producer price of these new protein source plants is quite low from farmers' perspective. So that's also one issue which may be a barrier for a larger plant cultivation in Central Finland and in Finland in general. Also, it was noted that dairy and meat, they are very important for regional livelihoods. And in fact, dairy and meat represent more than 80% of the total agricultural income in Central Finland. So they are very, economically, they are very important currently. And one more economic issue here, which was raised, is that supply chains of these novel protein sources are underdeveloped. And there's a clear lack of certain industrial processes in the supply chain, such as ingredient industries and certain processing stages, which are missing in many places. And finally, governance domain, which refers to policies, policymakers. I have here 2 direct citations. You can read them by yourself, but they emphasize the role of policymakers to make initiatives and encourage both farmers and public food service providers to novel directions and braver procurement practices. And also agricultural subsidy issue was raised, that there should be maybe better initiatives provided by subsidies for farmers. And also in this governance domain, I would add the role of food safety authorities and legislation. They have an important role in this transition process. As a conclusion, we can say that protein transition crosses multiple domains and scales, which I just presented, and co-evolution of domains at different scale levels leads to transition little by little. And in Central Finland, protein transition is full of tensions between scales and also trade-offs between domains. So this is a challenge for both policymakers and market actors. And in our new SRC research project, we are dealing with questions of just transition in the food system in Just Food project. So that will be the next step in this research. But I thank you for your attention. Is there any questions?
Okay, any questions? So you online, please use Menti. And then, okay, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting to see this spectrum of the plant proteins. I have a couple of questions regarding the social cultural domains, especially into this neophobia. Was it so related to the unknown product, or just by being new and not seen before? And how do you determine this neophobia? And the second question was...
One by one, please. Okay, it's easier. So the question was about neophobia.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe the neophobia was mainly related to insects as food. It's so new element in insects are so new element in our disease that that's why it's neophobia.
I could ask further in the same area. What about these new plant-based products? Do you see there any sort of, not maybe so strong word, neophobia, but maybe some kind of...
One of the respondents was working in a canteen, and she was providing plant-based lasagna to the clients, and one middle-aged male customer said that, "Are you going to kill us with these plant-based veggies?" So that maybe it's partly humor, but anyway, they are these kind of attitudes.
Yeah, they're
a little bit
still
negative attitudes still.
Yeah, okay. And the second question you had?
It was regarding the perception to introduce rather, you gave the example of introduce rather the bean instead of the processed bean, for example. Is it so the fear towards the process itself, or not fear, but the concern, or is rather the final product?
The question was about the fear of the raw material itself, like bean, or the processing of it?
I think for transition, it's important that we have different types of products in different forms. For example, if we think about beans, it's important that there are just basic beans available in the markets for consumers who want to cook themselves. But then for some very busy people who have no time to cook, these kind of ready-made or half-made products are a good option. So that's one requirement for the transition, that all the people are served in specific ways.
Okay.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I was wondering on the transition that they make a lot of sense, the different domains you looked into, but did you try to, in a way, you said in the end that the overall change is a puzzle that needs to progress gradually, but are you able to already now see that which one, where would you put your money?
Yes, the question was that because there was the different domains, that is there any particular one which would be the leading one or betting on?
So if we want faster and more radical change, we need governance. The governance domain is central. The policies which are made, there has to be good policies, fair policies for everybody. I now see that maybe markets are leading the way at this moment, not policymakers, but markets.
And do you see which one would be sort of one to make it faster? Pretty much the same question, actually, but you think that governance is one also to speed it up?
If they are able to provide clear institutional framework for the actors, which they can then follow.
Yeah, actually, because when the markets get the trust that this is going to be long-term policies, or the policies are supporting this change for long-term, maybe they're also willing to invest more. I don't know. Yes.
On that, I would basically, I think I agree that the policy is quite central, but in your interviews, did you have any hints that people would also be willing? I mean, it's easy to say that there should be more money for innovation or for the positive change, but is there in your interviews any signal that people would be willing to contract some of the currents in order to break the path dependencies that now exist? So in real terms, cutting the subsidies of certain type and actually transfer it rather than just increase.
Question about subsidies. Do you see any possibilities to cut some subsidies?
Or the interview is willing.
Yeah. Did you see any that kind of signs there in interviewees?
Yeah, when we think about protein transition, there are actually two transitions. One transition is to increase the share of plant-based proteins. Other transition is to decrease the animal-based proteins. And that is more difficult one, because there's more resistance for cutting subsidies. And in Central Finland, maybe, which is very much dominated by meat and dairy, cutting meat and dairy subsidies, it's difficult.
Okay, and then there is a question from Menti. Could you please repeat how the samples looked like? Who was interviewed? At the beginning there was this,
Yes, basically there were both food system actors, policymakers, and researchers, or specialists.
Yeah. Okay. One more question, because we have still time. I think we have still a few minutes time before our schedule goes totally off. I was thinking how you see, because you see this transition and you had these domains, how do you see those domains compared to sustainability, these 3 sustainability or 4, depending how you define it, to be compared to that?
This is sustainability of food.
Yes.
As a total.
Okay, yes.
There's no sustainability without all these.
Yeah, I agree. So that you sort of build, it is built in.
I see this as a sustainability framework.
Yeah.
As a whole.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? Is there in Menti any questions? Okay. Would that be N28 representative for the region? 28 interviews, would that be representative for the region?
Of course, this is very small sample.
Yeah.
And if we want to develop, for example, this framework further, we have to have different samples from different regions, different sizes, in different contexts. So this is a starting point. And actually this, I use this data for illustrating the framework, not to find like a final truth.
Yes, yeah, okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Then I will introduce the next, the last but not the least. I wonder why Antti is always the last one in our seminars. I'm sorry, this is not intentional. Maybe we leave the most interesting part sometimes in the end, no. So Antti Isokangas from Makery Oy will tell us consumer perspectives, which is very interesting, and we'll tie all these before heard topics together. Yes, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name, as said, is Antti Isokangas, and I represent Makery Oy, which is a Finnish consumer and market research company focused on food and fast-moving consumer goods. And in ScenoProt project, we've been doing these market and consumer research activities over the past years. And this picture here depicts basically all of the activities over the years that we've done. Today, I'm not going to focus on all of them, of course, but deliver or talk about the latest findings, latest results, and maybe a bit about the future expectations as well. So basically talking about 2019, 2020, and them in comparison to 2016. So, in 2016, Finland, so to say, was on the verge of the plant-based boom when this project was started. During the spring of 2016, we conducted a series of focus group interviews and an online research in Finland and in a couple of other countries. And yeah, a note. Today I'm only going to focus on Finland, so obviously there's a lot that we could speak about the European development as well, but today is not for that. So in case any questions on those, please contact later. But anyways, in 2016, the distribution of different diets among our respondents in an online survey with a nationally representative sample was like this. So obviously, the majority of respondents are omnivores. 17% of the respondents not even really interested in trying new plant-based foods, though 26% consider themselves omnivores, but willing to experiment with plant-based foods as well. What's interesting here is the really small share of vegan and vegetarian diets. So 1% vegan, can't even see myself, the colors. 1% lacto-vegetarian, 2% lacto-ovo vegetarian, and some few percent of people eating also fish. Anyways, this is the diets distribution at that time. At that time, the same time, the Finnish market for plant-based foods was very underdeveloped. So these 4 pictures of products are taken from a market analysis report from that time. These are the sort of most visible products at the time. But at the time of the research, there was, say, big things coming. So, right during the spring and summer of 2016, 2 products appeared on the market: Härkis by Versofood and Pulled Oats by Golden Green, which basically marked the turn of the tide, so to say, in the offering, the supply of plant-based products, consumer-ready products in Finland. Before that, in our research that we did, plant-based proteins were generally well recognized, but very few respondents had any experience cooking them or doing anything with them. They were considered difficult, or if even an option, let's say. Something about the barriers. So drivers that would increase or encourage people, consumers, to take up plant-based proteins to a larger extent, of course, include good taste, healthiness, the protein content, familiarity, so on, etc., etc. Barriers, interestingly, at that time, 21% of the respondents didn't even or couldn't even name a reason why to not use more plant-based protein. Not even an option, in a way. 16% say that the high price is the main barrier. Of course, distaste, unfamiliarity, people didn't know how to use them, so on. Also, 6% say, I can't say. I don't know why, but I don't just use them more. So price, distaste, unfamiliarity, the main barriers, taste, healthiness, and familiarity of the drivers. Oh. Too fast there. So, on the top level, 2016, we identified the key drivers, key barriers, a lot of other things around the plant-based protein consumption. But thinking about changing one's diet, changing one's everyday life towards, or the everyday life habits, changing them is a very slow, hard thing to do. So we, at that time, wanted to focus on identifying the possibilities of making those changes. How can we enable the small changes in everyday life, the small steps towards plant-based proteins from the traditional animal-based protein. And for this, throughout all the years 2017 to, well, actually this year marks the finalization of this task. We did a series of research activities at the same time, running parallel to the intervention study diets that we heard about earlier today. And just to summarize that quickly, I can go, no. Yeah, how was that? So with these intervention study surveys or studies, we set the baseline at the same time when the participants in the intervention study, when they started their study period, they responded to a survey research or tapping into their images of nutrient intake, their well-being, their general interest in health, their own health and other issues. This was done in the beginning. Then all of these people, they took the 12 weeks of intervention, the period, and throughout that time they had a possibility of writing down notes, insight about comments about everything that they experienced with links to the study. So ranging from the products that they use, the effects that they have on the products had on their physiology, yes, well-being, all of that, social surroundings. The diaries contain info on those. Then, upon finishing the intervention period, the 12 weeks, they answer again to the same survey, which then gives us a sort of insight on how taking part in the intervention study, how it changed their perceptions and their preferences in many ways. Good. We noted some changes, but then more interesting is for how long and to what extent these kind of short-term changes, how long and to what extent they persist in the future. So 2 more rounds of these surveys linked to the intervention study were done in after 3 months finishing, 3 months finishing of the intervention period, and second one 2 years after finishing the period. And there's a lot of results coming out this year, by the end of the year, about this study, intervention parallel studies, but today I'll just show you some of my top picks. So this is the graphic illustration of on the question, did the participation in the intervention study have an impact on the following aspects on your behavior 2 years after finishing the period? So we see the greener the color, or the darker the color, the stronger of an effect. We see here on the top there's choosing the food from grocery stores, and 80% of the respondents here still feel that 2 years after finishing the period, they feel that there's an effect. Paying attention to healthiness of food increased a lot. So 2 years after finishing, still the respondents feel that there's an effect caused by the intervention study. Then, what changes did the study bring or encourage? 33%. This is an open, that has to be emphasized. This is an open-ended question, so there were no selection. This is comments, free open comments that are categorized and calculated. So use of vegetables and plant-based proteins increased, but then the two key things that I want to sort of underline: meat consumption decreased or sources of protein more versatile before, 24%, and switching to an all plant-based diet because of taking part in the intervention 10%. So this is, we had a question earlier in the lecture hall about this, and so I don't know if this answers the question, but we may come back to that later. Anyways, a lot of good things happening because of the intervention. Also, because people were exposed to new products, were exposed to new raw materials, were given recipes. As a result of that, there also was an increase in interest towards cooking, and sort of the learning and being exposed to new things also encouraged interest in the new things. Another topic, most of the respondents think that Finns should increase the use of plant proteins. So on the left-hand side, there's the graphic where the amount of respondents is 93, and sorry about the partially Finnish-speaking slide. 91% of these say that yes, Finns should decrease or increase the use of plant proteins. And on the right-hand side, we see there the respondents' take on the means or factors how this should be done. Obviously, pricing is important. Naturally, development of plant-based products, so better products on the market. Remember, this is 2017 we're talking about. Providing information, raising awareness, better supply, provision of recipes, teaching, getting well, a bit of a misspell here, but teaching and educating children and young people, 13%. Advertising, tastings, presentations. So then, in the previous slide here, we have an open-ended question. So no given alternative responses. Here we have a question where some of the alternatives, the possible, were given. So, and the respondents, they chose from a list. In your opinion, which of these factors would encourage Finns to increase the eating of plant proteins? This is the top most chosen options. Better selection of alternatives in food service, recipes, lower price, sample tastings, better products, better visibility. The key thing, the most interesting thing, that 80% of respondents feel that public food service has a key effect. Okay, that's about that. Then we move on to a different part of our work. What did the future look like? This refers to 2018, us doing an online research with young consumers, aged between 16 and 22. It's a 300 respondent sample. And why we did this? Because we felt, we realized, we knew that diet shifts on a big scale, large scale, happen over time, happen possibly over generations, and sort of the big changes happen in that way. We had a vision in ScenoProt of the year 2030, where a lot of the Finnish food system would would have developed into a direction where plant-based products are more in use. And so talking to the late teens, early 20s people in 2018, sort of, and probing into their attitudes, their opinions on various aspects of eating, would give us an example or an idea of how the big picture would be in 2030. So here's what we found. Again, just a couple of topics. If this is of interest to you, just get in touch. I'll tell you more. Again, a partially Finnish speaking slide. Sorry about that. Anyways, imagine yourself in the future. From the provided list, select the ones that you believe are going to increase or decrease in your personal life. Sample of 300. We see quite interesting from the, let's say, from the project ScenoProt perspective, quite interesting results. So 76% of the respondents believe that plant-based eating would increase over the next 10 years significantly in their personal life. 62% see that plant-based protein would increase. The share of protein in nutrition scored 54% increase. The orange bars are decrease. The gray ones are increase. Then, if we look at the bottom of the list, we have sort of most decreasing aspects. Share of fats in nutrition, alcohol consumption, and 51% of the respondents believing meat consumption will decrease significantly over the next 10 years in their personal life. So, with this and the research, we found, or we think that there's strong interest in plant-based proteins among the young. That linked to the graph on the right. Again, partially Finnish. In general, how interested are you in experimenting with new food items? 80% of respondents saying that they are at least somewhat interested in taking up or trying new products. So with this in mind, these two combined, I want to say that there's a bright future for plant-based proteins with, of course, circumstances providing. The same people were also questioned or asked about changes not in their personal life, but in the society as a whole. On a scale of 1 to 7, how likely do you think that the following phenomena will be common over the next 10 years? We're not talking about all of them, the interesting ones. Plant-based eating, 82%. Artificial lab-grown meat and dairy, 51%. Meat becoming a luxury, 30%. So this is sort of, to me, it says that meat is not going away. It's not like all Finland would be going vegetarian, vegan over or in the future. That's not going to happen. Meat is going to be a part of our diets, and it's not even going to be a luxury product. It's still going to be maybe its value or the weight of meat in the average diet might become less, but meat is there and it will stay there for the foreseeable future. A whole different question then is whether it is naturally grown meat or whether it is artificial lab-grown meat. Okay, so going to this year and last year, so we ran an update on the same research that we did on 2016. In 2016, we ran not the same survey, but a lot of the questions were similar. And we ran it in the same countries: Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and the UK, with 500 respondents from each country. Here, well, just for background, in 2019, 2019 was the first time in the current or recent history when meat consumption as a whole took a downturn. So before this, meat consumption has been on the rise, but 2019 was the first year it took a downturn. Okay. Also, here in our results, we see the same classes, same categories of respondents. 12.8% not even interested in trying plant-based foods. 26.5 saying they carrying an omnivorous diet, but also or eating meat, but taking vegetarian days or having regular times of plant-based eating. The vegetarian and vegan diets were much more popular in 2019 than 2016. I'll show you some of the comparisons a bit later. But from a second study that we did this year, was an individually sort of conducted survey in Finland with 500 respondents. In that we saw that 57% of the respondents there had cut their meat consumption over the past year. Maybe that's all for that. In 2019, drivers and barriers quite similar, or to an extent similar to 2016. Price, unfamiliarity, distaste still are the key barriers. But there were some changes in the drivers. So in 2019, the strongest driver for eating more plant-based is health concerns. But on top of that, or second to that, there's environmental concerns, and also animal welfare concerns are noted. The two later ones, environmental issues and animal welfare, not even really considered a thing in 2016. Okay, thinking about the meat substitutes market, plant-based or protein applications that are used in the same way as one would use a meat alternative. The market since 2016 has boomed. There's a huge amount of new products on the market, and new launches come in regularly. Every time and again, there's a batch of new launches, interesting, ever better, one could say, plant-based products. So we've taken reviews of the numbers on the market level in Finland and in some European countries over the years. First in 2016, then one in 2018, I think, and 2019, and just this year. For this occasion, I pulled out this data from a this kind of market database by Global Data PLC. Now here we see that the total value of the Finnish meat substitute market value estimate is, the total increase is 32% on the bottom row for all of the categories combined. 2016 to 2020, 32% of value growth. And normally when the absolutes, when the volumes go up, the relative growth percentage grows smaller. But in this case, here, Global Data PLC estimates even stronger growth for the Finnish meat substitutes market for the coming years. So 2020 to 2024, the total estimated growth will be 38%. But of course, big growth percentages also, or in part, stem from small base figures. The meat substitutes market this year represents around 1% of the meat what's the word? Processed meat markets. Yeah, processed meat markets. So processed meat market is much bigger. It's not even comparable in a way, but still, 2016 was the first year that these global database collectors and these companies, 2016 was the first year that they even registered meat substitutes as a category. So the sort of the change is fundamentally huge. So just a few comparisons between or during the start of our project and today. Here we see the comparisons in diets. So 2016, the amount of pescatarian was 3.2%, lacto-ovo-vegetarians 1.4%, lacto-vegetarians 1.2%, vegans 0.8%. In 2020, vegans 2.9%, which is a huge change, although has to be noted that in this 2020 research, the respondents were screened in a way so that they have had to have at least one experience with a plant-based protein product in their life. So either they currently use them or they use them and quit or something else, but they had to have a personal touch point with the category or the product type. These green outline product or diets combined in 2016 was 7%, in 2020 is 15%. So this 15% of respondents steer away from meat. More comparisons. 2016, 2019, sources of protein. No big changes except a nice increase in plant-based proteins. Some small changes downwards in dairy products and eggs. To us, it says or suggests that meat as a cultural element is strong, but consumers are increasingly looking for options to replace such animal-based proteins that are easy enough to be changed. More comparisons. Drivers, for plant-based eating, as I said, 2016, the drivers were more personal, whereas in 2019, these environmental concerns about animal welfare are at the top of the list. We don't know the reasons exactly, but obviously the discussion, the debate over these concerns, whether they are feasible, whether they are even concerns in Finland, in our market, is ongoing and increasing, and that must have had a effect on this. Barriers, 2016, 2019, 2020. In 2016, 21% stating they have no reason to not use more plant proteins. For 16%, the main reason was price. And then there's distaste, unfamiliarity. In 2019, price is the topmost. Again, must be noted that in 2016, the respondents only chose one alternative from a given list, and in 2019 and 2020, they chose between 1 and 3. This change was made because in 2016, or after running the research, then we noted that the reasons are always sort of more complex, and we wanted to give the respondents a bit more flexibility. So in 2019, price, lack of knowledge, distaste, inability or not knowing how to use the products. Again, all linked to distaste, price, and lack of information. In 2020, the weight of price as a barrier has even increased more. Uncertainty, 33. Previous bad experience, of course, is a bit under a third. Raw material origins and allergens or unsuitabilities of ingredients, also listing. Let's not go there. I'll just say 2 words about this more. Now, the results for 2020 are not actually finalized. There's still a bit of analysis ongoing, but we are wondering about the weight of price increasing by such a lot over 19 or between 19 and 20. Obviously, there might be a COVID-19 reason where because of the economic shock, consumers might have turned back to sort of more cheaper, more familiar foods to eat and cook at home. So in that sense, if the price difference between meat or animal protein and plant protein is there, then this would mean that price as a barrier to plant proteins would increase, of course. Well, summarizing between 16 and 2020, some key barriers to increasing plant-based protein consumption or plant-based consumption in general. Some key barriers have been lifted, and in a way, the way is paved, but we have to understand that the change is slow. With the supply side providing, major changes are bound to happen over time, as in over generations, not in years. The youth of today will be behaving much differently in their 30s once they get to them. And on a note, for the COVID-19, African swine flu. Changes in global protein supply would most likely catalyze the protein shift in a way. So as we see, COVID-19 shut down factories in the US, in China, now in Germany and maybe elsewhere as well. African swine flu did the same in China, US. Well, I'm not sure about that actually, but China at least. I am, yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, let's not talk about pandemics then. Education, exposure, and experience are needed for consumers to take up new foods in their diet, and learned behavior sits tight. We feel that currently the food industry is fulfilling their role, so they're bringing out new products, supplying the market with a variety of convenient plant-based foods, and consumers are taking them up nicely. With the identified barriers in mind, national governmental steering is needed to sort of encourage the shift. And this last sentence, what I wanted to just leave you with, competition is increasing. What's next after plant-based proteins? I believe cellular agriculture is around the corner, and we should not be only thinking about plant-based proteins, but cell ag as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is question. In 2019 survey, price was mentioned as one of the biggest barrier. Was the income of the responders considered in the survey? In which range were they?
It was a general population survey, so we didn't pay attention to or limiting the income levels, at least.
So there is no information what kind of income?
It's there, but it's not
so
restricted.
it's average?
Yeah, average.
Yes.
We can say it's average, yes.
Yeah, okay. Then there is another one, maybe you answered it already, but maybe short summary. What is the most interesting / significant change in consumer perceptions between 2016 and 2019 based on the online surveys?
Well, to me, it would be that in 2016, the concerns and the drivers for plant-based eating are personal in the big picture. And 2019, there's a lot more variation. There's the animal welfare, the environmental concerns are there strongly. So maybe that's, if I had to pick one.
Okay, good summary. Any questions here, from audience? No? Okay, so let's thank Antti.
Kiitos.
And then we have conclusion remarks. Maybe I go to this, people see who is talking. So last and final, summing up and discussion, Mikael Hildén, Program Leader from Strategic Research Council. Please, welcome. Some thoughts about the presentations we had today.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much to all presenters. I think this has been a very interesting day, and I should say I'm not a food expert, apart from eating food like everyone else. And I think it's interesting because the strategic research has focused and is focusing on societal transitions. So the whole motivation for the strategic research is to chart out possible future change and preparing the society in many ways for them. And I think you've done an excellent job in ScenoProt and now with this seminar as well in charting out the dimensions. I think the point that came in the talk about transition is that it really is about a transition, and a large transition that doesn't occur only at the like a regional level, but as in the last talk, it is genuinely more widespread. But the other lesson I think to take home from today's seminar is that the different scales that it actually goes from the physiological level, from the individual level, and then builds up onto the more societal level, and they fill very different but equally important needs, these different pieces of information. So we have the need in the studies of allergies or the health benefits, give the arguments for accepting a transition, and then also for making people daring to take the step then to change both at their personal level, but then of course also in form of the food industry to change. So I was just actually interviewed last week by the traditional meat producer Scan, who is reflecting on their future pathways. And one of the arguments that I presented was that obviously this research within the strategic research shows that it's not about whether there will be a change, it's about how fast it comes and how fundamental it will be. Like in Antti's presentation, there's a 1% at current, but we had precisely the same change, say in solar power, changing from something very small to then speeding up and actually making really fundamental systemic changes. So I think we can see similar things and there are interesting parallels between the transition in the food system and in the energy system or other system, and I think that makes it both exciting and also interesting for reflection that we will have in the strategic research, the scenario workshop in 2 weeks' time that can also bring these future outlooks together. So all in all, thank you for the presentations. I think they brought lots of insights, and the interesting thing is the combination of different perspectives. So thanks.
Thank you, and I guess we can conclude here. And I just would like to remind you that you can follow ScenoProt at Twitter, and we have all these materials available from previous seminars and all our articles and everything available at our webpage, luke.fi/ScenoProt. So go and look from there. Thank you.